The heavy scent of iron and expensive sandalwood filled the penthouse, but all Alara could hear was the frantic, uneven rhythm of her own heart. The man she knew as Mr. Thorne, the soft-spoken regular who tipped 50% and always asked about her mother's health, was gone. In his place stood a silhouette of cold, jagged edges, his tailored charcoal suit splattered with a visceral reality that didn't belong in a coffee shop. In his right hand, a matte black beretta rested against his thigh as if it were an extension of his own bone. At his feet, the man who had been stalking Alara for weeks lay crumpled, whimpering in a language of pure terror. "I told you to stay in the car, Alara," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a predatory weight that seemed to pin her against the mahogany doorframe. She couldn't look away. Not from the blood on his knuckles, and certainly not from his eyes, those storm-gray depths that used to crinkle with warmth over a latte. Now, they were void of everything but a dark, possessive hunger. She looked at him with a cocktail of shattering betrayal and a terrifying, involuntary spark of recognition. She didn't see a monster, she saw the man who had protected her, now revealed as the reason she needed protection in the first place. He moved then, a blur of predatory grace, closing the distance until the heat radiating from his chest scorched her skin. He didn't grab her. He leaned in, trapping her between his arms, his shadow swallowing her whole. The silence between them was a living thing, stretched thin like a wire about to snap. "Don't," he whispered, his breath ghosting over her lips. "Don't what?" she breathed, her voice trembling. "If you look at me like that again." He paused, his thumb catching a stray tear on her cheek, his touch surprisingly soft despite the violence he'd just enacted. "If you look at me with that mix of horror and heat, I am going to stop trying to be the good man you think I am. I will take you, Alara. I will burn every bridge you have to the normal world and pull you into mine. And the worst part? You'll never want to leave." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers, the cold metal of the gun momentarily brushing her hip. "So, look away," he commanded, a desperate edge cracking his composure. "Look away and tell me you hate me. Tell me you want the kind customer back. Because if you keep looking at me like I'm your savior while I'm covered in another man's blood, I'm never letting you go." Alara didn't look away. And in that moment, she realized the man she'd served coffee to for 6 months was a lie, but the devil standing before her was the only truth she had left. But to understand how Alara found herself trapped between a mahogany doorframe and the most dangerous man in the city, we need to go back. Back to the beginning. Back to when the only storm in her life was the espresso machine that kept breaking at the worst possible moments. Before you settle in for this story, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you're going to need to see how this ends. 6 months before that blood-soaked penthouse, Alara Vance was nothing more than a woman trying to survive. The Broken Compass Cafe sat wedged between a failing bookshop and a dry cleaner on the corner of Meridian Street, the kind of establishment that tourists walked past without a second glance but locals swore by with religious fervor. It was here that Alara had found her sanctuary after the world had systematically taken everything else from her. Her father had died when she was 17. A heart attack, they said. Swift and merciless, the way death often is. Her mother, Vera, had crumbled slowly in the aftermath, like a cathedral succumbing to centuries rather than a single blow. By the time Alara turned 24, Vera's early-onset dementia had progressed to the point where she didn't always recognize her own daughter. The care facility that housed Vera cost more than Alara's apartment, her dignity, and sometimes, it felt, her very soul. She worked doubles, triples, whatever shifts the cafe would give her. She picked up catering gigs on weekends. She sold her car, then her grandmother's jewelry, then anything that could fetch a price. She was drowning, and no one was throwing her a rope. Until he walked in. It was a Tuesday. She remembered because Tuesdays were the worst, slow enough that her mind wandered to the bills she couldn't pay, but busy enough that she couldn't leave early. The autumn rain had been relentless for 3 days straight, turning the city into a watercolor of gray misery. The bell above the door chimed at precisely 7:43 in the morning. Elara looked up from the register, her customer service smile already painted on, and felt the words die somewhere between her brain and her lips. He was tall, not merely above average, but the kind of tall that made rooms feel smaller. His shoulders were broad beneath a midnight blue overcoat that probably cost more than 3 months of Elara's rent. Dark hair, slightly damp from the rain, was pushed back from a face that seemed carved from contradiction. Sharp jaw, sharper cheekbones, but a mouth that looked like it might have smiled once, in another life. And his eyes, they were the gray of storm clouds, of smoke, of winter mornings that never quite warmed. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of either military precision or something far more dangerous. Each step was deliberate, measured, as if he were calculating the trajectory of every person in the room. "Good morning," Elara managed, finding her voice somewhere in the wreckage of her composure. "What can I get for you?" He studied the menu board with an intensity that seemed almost comical for something as mundane as coffee. Then those storm-gray eyes dropped to her, and she felt it, a sensation like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you shouldn't look down but doing it anyway. "Black coffee," he said. His voice was low, smooth, with the faintest trace of an accent she couldn't place. Eastern European, perhaps, or something that had been carefully, deliberately scrubbed away over time. "Large. And whatever pastry you recommend." "Our apple galette is popular." "Then I'll trust your judgment." It was such a small thing, such an insignificant exchange. She'd had 1,000 like it before. But when their fingers brushed as she handed him his change, something flickered in those gray eyes, recognition, maybe, or calculation. She couldn't tell which. He sat in the corner booth, the one with the torn leather seat that no one ever wanted. He stayed for 2 hours, nursing his coffee, occasionally typing on his phone with a focus that suggested the messages were not casual. When he left, he placed a $50 bill on the table. His coffee had cost $4. He came back the next day. And the day after that. And the day after that. Within 2 weeks, Elara knew 3 things about the man who signed his credit card receipts as C. Thorne. First, he took his coffee black, no sugar, hot enough to scald. Second, he was observant in a way that felt almost predatory. She'd caught him watching her with an intensity that should have frightened her but instead made her feel strangely seen. Third, despite his intimidating presence, he was unfailingly polite. Not the superficial politeness of social obligation, but something deeper, more deliberate. "How is your mother?" he asked one morning, about a month into his daily visits. Elara nearly dropped the cup she was filling. She'd mentioned her mother exactly once, in passing, to her coworker Josette when she thought no customers were listening. It had been a bad day. Vera hadn't recognized her during the previous night's visit, had screamed at her to leave, had called her a thief. "I'm sorry," he said, reading her expression. "I didn't mean to overstep." "No, she's." Elara set down the cup, her hands suddenly unsteady. "She's the same." Which is really just a polite way of saying she's worse. He nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. "The facility she's in, St. Rosaline's, yes?" I've heard their memory care wing is exceptional. Now Alara did freeze. She had never, not once, mentioned the name of her mother's care facility. How do you know that? Something shifted in his expression, so quickly she almost missed it. A flicker of something that might have been irritation, but not at her. At himself. Forgive me, he said smoothly. I have a habit of noticing details. The parking permit on your bag, St. Rosaline's issues them to family members of long-term residents. My aunt was there years ago. It was a lie. Alara knew it was a lie with a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than logic. But she let it slide, because the alternative, that this stranger was somehow investigating her, was too unsettling to contemplate. She's stable, Alara finally said. That's all I can really ask for. He held her gaze for a long moment. Sometimes stable is enough. Sometimes it's everything. After that, he asked about her mother every time he came in. Not in a prying way, but with genuine interest. He seemed to remember every detail she shared, the doctors' names, the medications, the small victories and devastating setbacks. He was the first person in years who listened to her talk about Vera without pity in his eyes. The tips got larger. Suspiciously larger. Alara tried to refuse them at first, but he simply left the money on the table and walked out before she could protest. She told herself it was generosity, nothing more. She told herself he was just a wealthy man with money to spare. She told herself a lot of things, in those early weeks. By the second month, she knew his coffee order by heart. By the third month, she had started brewing it when she saw his black sedan pull up outside. By the fourth month, she found herself actually looking forward to seeing him, this strange, silent man who asked about her mother and left extravagant tips and looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world made of shadows. She didn't know his first name. She didn't know what he did for a living. She didn't know why a man in custom-tailored suits would spend 2 hours every morning in a shabby cafe with water stains on the ceiling and cracks in the tile floor. But she was about to find out. Because the night Alara noticed the black SUV following her home from her shift, the night she mentioned it to Mr. Thorne with a nervous laugh and watched his eyes go cold and hard as glacier ice, that was the night everything began to change. Describe the vehicle, he said, and his voice had dropped to something that didn't sound like a customer making concerned small talk. I don't know, it was dark. The license plate. Did you see it? No, why does it matter? It's probably nothing. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, Alara saw something behind the polite mask. Something ancient and violent and terrifyingly protective. It's not nothing, he said. It's never nothing. Not with you. And she should have asked what he meant. She should have demanded answers. But the bell above the door chimed, and a family walked in wanting hot chocolate, and by the time she turned back, Mr. Thorne was already gone, his table empty, a $100 bill weighted down by his untouched coffee cup. That night, when she walked home, she noticed the black SUV was nowhere to be seen. She also noticed a different car, a silver sedan, sleek and expensive, parked across from her apartment building. And in the driver's seat, barely visible in the darkness, she could have sworn she saw storm-gray eyes watching her safely through her front door. The stalking didn't stop. It evolved. At first, it was just the SUV, appearing in her rearview mirror when she took the bus to St. Rosaline's, idling at the end of her street when she came home from late shifts. She told herself she was being paranoid. The city was full of black SUVs. The city was full of people with reasons to drive down her street. But then the letters started. The first one appeared in her mailbox 3 weeks after she'd mentioned the SUV to Mr. Thorne. Plain white envelope, no return address, her name typed on the front in a font that looked almost clinical. Inside was a photograph. Ilara. Walking home from work. Taken from behind, close enough that she could see the fraying strap of her bag, the coffee stain on her apron she hadn't noticed, the exact way her hair curled at the nape of her neck. There was no note. No demands. Just the photograph, and the sickening realization that someone had been close enough to touch her without her knowing. She went to the police. A tired detective with bags under his eyes took her statement, photocopied the letter, and told her to call if anything escalated. His tone suggested he dealt with a dozen scared women a week and didn't have the resources to protect any of them. The second letter came 2 days later. Another photograph, this time of Ilara through her kitchen window, making dinner. She'd been wearing an old t-shirt and shorts, her hair piled messily on top of her head. Intimate. Vulnerable. Written on the back of this one, in careful handwriting, I'm watching you become. Become what? The question haunted her. Become brave, become afraid, become compliant? Become his, whoever he was? She bought new locks. She started taking different routes home. She stopped leaving her blinds open after dark. She didn't tell anyone, not her coworkers, not Vera's nurses, not the friends who'd slowly drifted away when her life became an endless loop of work and caregiving. The only person who noticed anything was wrong was Mr. Thorne. You're not sleeping, he observed on a Thursday morning, nearly 5 months into his daily visits. The shadows under your eyes weren't there last week. Ilara's hand trembled as she placed his coffee on the table. Just stress. You know how it is. I know exactly how it is. He studied her with that unnerving intensity. Tell me what's happening. It's nothing. Ilara. The way he said her name, it wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in velvet, gentle in delivery but steel in foundation. Tell me. And maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the fact that for 5 months, this strange man had been the only consistent point of light in her increasingly dark world. Whatever the reason, she told him. All of it. The SUV. The letters. The photographs. The police who couldn't or wouldn't help. The way she lay awake at night, hearing footsteps that weren't there, seeing shadows that moved wrong. He listened without interrupting. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did, something that looked almost like controlled fury, like a furnace carefully contained behind blast-proof doors. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Do you still have the letters? I gave copies to the police, but I have the originals. Bring them tomorrow. Why? What are you going to? Just bring them. He pulled out his wallet, but instead of cash, he produced a business card. Matte black, with silver embossed lettering, Cash and Thorne. No title. No company. Just a phone number. If anything happens, anything, you call this number. Day or night. Do you understand? Cashin. His first name was Cashin. Such a beautiful name, she thought absurdly. Such a dangerous name. Mr. Thorne, I can't. Cashin, he corrected. And you can. You will. He stood, and for the first time since she'd known him, he reached out and touched her, just his hand on her shoulder, brief and purposeful. You're not alone in this, Ilara. I need you to believe that. She brought him the letters the next day, as instructed. He examined each one with the careful attention of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. When he looked up, his jaw was tight. "There's a watermark on this paper," he said. "Custom stock, expensive. The font is called distinctive, often used by luxury brands. And the handwriting on the back." He paused, something flickering across his face. "I've seen it before." "Where?" "Who?" But he was already standing, already pulling on his overcoat, already retreating behind that impenetrable mask of control. "I need to look into something." "Don't go home tonight." "What?" "I can't just." "There's a hotel on Waverly Street, the Vermilion. I've arranged a room." "Here." He pressed something into her hand, a keycard and a fold of bills. "Stay there until you hear from me." "Mr. Thorne, Cashin, you're scaring me." He paused at the door, and when he looked back, she saw it again, that ancient, violent thing lurking beneath his polite surface. "Good. You should be scared. The man sending these letters is not an amateur. He's a professional. And he's not watching you because he's obsessed with you, Alara. He's watching you because of me." Then he was gone, and Alara was left holding a keycard to a life she didn't understand. She went to the hotel. She didn't know why. Logic told her to go to the police, to ignore this strange man's cryptic warnings, to handle her own problems the way she'd always handled them. But logic had never made her feel as safe as Cashin Thorne's voice did. The room at the Vermilion was nicer than any place she'd ever stayed. A king-sized bed with sheets that felt like water against her skin. A bathroom with a marble tub. A view of the city that sparkled like a promise. On the pillow was a box of her favorite tea, the obscure herbal blend she drank at the cafe during slow afternoons. Next to it, a handwritten note in elegant script, "Rest. You're protected here. See." She should have found it creepy. She should have been disturbed that he knew her tea preference, that he'd somehow arranged all this in the hours since their conversation. Instead, she felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. She slept for 12 hours straight. The first real sleep she'd had in weeks. When she woke, there was a message on her phone from an unknown number: "Stay in the hotel. Working on something. We'll explain everything soon." She stayed for 3 days. On the second day, she received a call from St. Rosaline's. Her mother's medical bills, the ones she'd been struggling to pay, the ones that were 3 months overdue, had been paid in full. All of them. Plus a year in advance. "There must be some mistake," Alara told the billing administrator. "No mistake, dear. Anonymous donation, but the funds have already cleared. You don't owe us a thing." Alara hung up the phone and stared at the city below her window. Anonymous donation. A hotel room that cost more per night than she earned in a week. Letters examined by someone who recognized watermarks and handwriting. A man who knew too much and said too little. Who was Cashin Thorne? The answer came on the third day, when she finally left the hotel. She'd run out of patience, out of distractions, out of reasons to hide in luxury while her life waited outside. She went to the cafe first. Josette hugged her, told her she'd been worried, asked where she'd been. Alara mumbled something about a family emergency and took over the afternoon shift. She was halfway through a latte for a teenager with green hair when she saw him through the window. Not Cashin. The other one. He was across the street, leaning against a lamp post with the casual arrogance of someone who wanted to be seen. He was young, maybe 30, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruel set of his mouth. He was watching the cafe. Watching her. And when she met his eyes, he smiled, a slow, predatory smile that made her skin crawl. Then he raised his phone, pointed it at her, and took a picture. Ilara's hands shook so badly she spilled the latte. When she looked up again, the man was gone. But in his place, parked across the street, was a familiar black sedan. And stepping out of it, with a face like a thundercloud and eyes like the end of the world, was Cashin Thorne. He didn't come into the cafe. He stood on the sidewalk, scanning the street, his posture suggesting he was looking for something, or someone. When he seemed satisfied, he pulled out his phone and made a call. Ilara watched his lips move, watched his expression shift from cold fury to something more controlled. When he hung up, he looked directly at her through the window. He held up one finger. Wait. 30 seconds later, a text arrived on her phone. When your shift ends, come outside. We need to talk. She wanted to ignore him. She wanted to finish her shift, go home, lock her door, and pretend the last 3 days hadn't happened. But when she looked at the spot where the stalker had stood, when she remembered that cruel smile, she knew she was past the point of pretending. Her shift ended at 6. When she stepped outside, the black sedan was waiting at the curb, and Cashin Thorne was holding the door open. Get in. Are you going to tell me what's going on? Yes. But not here. Please, Ilara. Get in the car. She got in. The interior was all black leather and silence. Cashin slid in beside her, gave a quiet command to the driver, a man with a shaved head and shoulders like a linebacker, and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. The man watching you, Cashin said without preamble, is named Stellan Voronov. He's a former operative, Russian intelligence, before he went private. He now works for whoever pays the highest price. Currently, that appears to be someone who wants to get to me. Ilara's throat felt like it was closing. Get to you? Why would someone use me to? Because I've been watching you for 6 months. Because I've been protecting you since the moment I walked into that cafe. And because in this world, Ilara, the people I care about become targets. People he cared about. The words landed somewhere deep, somewhere she couldn't examine right now. I don't understand, she said. Who are you? Really? He turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the car, his face was all shadows and edges. I'm the man who runs the largest criminal organization on the eastern seaboard, he said simply. I've killed more people than I can count. I've ordered deaths, funded empires, toppled governments in small ways. I am, by any reasonable definition, a monster. Ilara couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't reconcile the man who asked about her mother's health with the man describing himself like a headline from a true crime documentary. Why? Her voice cracked. Why me? Why did you come to the cafe? Why any of this? Something shifted in his expression. For the first time, he looked almost vulnerable. Because 6 months ago, I was supposed to have you killed. The words hung in the air between them, toxic and incomprehensible. What? Ilara whispered. Cashin's jaw tightened. There's a debt. An old one. Your father owed money to very dangerous people, not my organization, but adjacent to it. When he died, that debt transferred to his next of kin. My father was an accountant. He drove a Camry. He was an accountant who occasionally laundered money for people who don't take well to being reported to the IRS. Cashin's voice was flat, clinical. When he discovered what he was really doing, he tried to make it right. He went to the authorities. 3 days later, he had a heart attack. The world tilted. You're saying he was murdered? I'm saying someone in his office knew how to make certain medications react badly with others. I'm saying his death was very convenient for the people he betrayed. And I'm saying that when those people came to me 6 months ago, asking me to handle the remaining loose end, his daughter, I agreed to look into it. Ilara reached for the door handle, some primitive instinct screaming at her to run. Cashin caught her wrist, not harshly, but with an unbreakable grip. Listen to me, he said. I came to that cafe intending to evaluate the situation. To determine if you were a threat that needed to be eliminated. But then what? His grip loosened, but he didn't let go. His thumb traced absent circles on her pulse point. Then you smiled at me, he said quietly. You asked how I took my coffee. You had flour on your cheek from the pastries, and when I pointed it out, you laughed. This ridiculous, genuine laugh, like the world was still capable of surprising you. He paused. And I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't even think about doing it. So instead you stalked me for 6 months? I protected you for 6 months. Every man I assigned to watch your apartment, every suspicious car I had investigated, every threat I intercepted before it reached you, that was protection, Ilara. That was me trying to keep you safe while I dismantled the people who wanted you dead. But someone else found out. This Stellan person. Stellan works for the original client. They got tired of waiting for me to fulfill the contract. They hired him to either force my hand or handle the matter themselves. His expression hardened. The letters, the photographs, those weren't just intimidation. They were messages to me. Telling me they knew where to find you. Telling me my protection wasn't enough. Ilara pulled her hand free. Her mind was spinning, trying to fit pieces together that refused to align. The money. My mother's bills. That was you? Yes. The hotel. The tea. You knowing everything about me. Yes. You've been controlling my life. I've been keeping you alive. There was heat in his voice now, frustration breaking through the careful control. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to fall for a woman I was supposed to kill? Every day I walked into that cafe was a betrayal of everything I am. Every conversation we had made it harder to do my job. And now, he broke off, running a hand through his dark hair. Now Stellan knows my weakness. Now you're in more danger than ever. Not because of what your father did, but because of how I feel about you. How you feel about me. Ilara stared at him, incredulous. You don't even know me. I know you bring your mother flowers every Tuesday even though she doesn't remember what flowers are anymore. I know you leave the biggest tips at the diner down the street because the waitress is a single mother. I know you cry in the break room on your father's birthday and tell everyone you're fine. I know you haven't bought new shoes in 2 years because every spare dollar goes to Vera's care. I know you, Ilara. Better than you want me to. The car had stopped. Through the tinted windows, Ilara could see the gleaming facade of a high-rise, the kind of building where billionaires and diplomats kept private residences far above the concerns of ordinary people. Where are we? My penthouse. We need to discuss your options, and this is the safest place in the city. My options? What options? Cashin finally released her hand. You have 3. First, you walk away from this car, from me, and you take your chances. I can give you money, a new identity, resources to disappear. It's not foolproof, but it's a chance. And the second? You come upstairs with me. You stay under my protection until I eliminate the threat. Stellan, his employers, everyone who wants you dead, I make them disappear, and when it's done, you're free. Ilara studied his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the manipulation. But all she saw was a man who looked as lost as she felt. What's the third option? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You stay. Not as a guest. Not as someone I'm protecting out of guilt or obligation. You stay because, he stopped, seemed to gather himself. Because what I feel for you isn't going to go away when this is over. Because I've spent 6 months trying to be the kind customer, and I'm tired of pretending that's all I am to you. You're asking me to choose you? A murderer? A criminal? I'm asking you to see me as I am and decide if you can live with that. He met her eyes, and she saw it there, the hunger, the desperation, the terrifying depth of his feeling. I won't force you. I won't manipulate you. But I won't lie to you either. Not anymore. Ilara looked at the building, at the door of the car, at the man beside her. Her entire life had been built on survival, making do, getting by, enduring. She had never wanted anything for herself. Had never allowed herself the luxury of desire. But sitting in this car, with Cashin's confession hanging between them, she realized she wanted something now. She just wasn't sure if what she wanted was escape or surrender. Take me upstairs, she said finally. Something flickered in his eyes, relief, maybe, or hope. Are you sure? I'm not sure of anything. But I'm tired of running from things I don't understand. She reached for the door handle. Show me your world, Cashin. Then I'll decide if I can survive in it. The penthouse was everything she expected and nothing she was prepared for. Marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the city like a living tapestry. Art on the walls that probably cost more than Ilara would earn in a lifetime. But for all its beauty, there was a coldness to it, a museum-quality sterility that suggested this was a place for power, not for living. Cashin led her through the main room, past a kitchen that had clearly never been used for anything as mundane as actual cooking, and into a study lined with books. Real books, old books, the kind that smelled of leather and secrets. Drink? He moved to a bar cart in the corner. No. I need to think clearly. He nodded and poured himself 2 fingers of something amber. When he turned back, the predatory mask was firmly in place, but she could see the cracks now, the strain of holding it together. Ask me anything, he said. I owe you the truth. How many people have you killed? He didn't flinch. Personally? 43. On my orders? I stopped counting. Do you feel guilty? For some of them. He took a sip of his drink. Most were people who would have killed me or someone I protect. A few were innocent. Those are the ones I dream about. And me? When you took the contract, did you ever intend to kill me? Now, take a moment and think about this. What would you do if you discovered that the one person who made you feel safe was the same person meant to destroy you? Could you forgive? Could you trust again? Drop your answer in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts. Cashin set down his glass. When he spoke, his voice was raw. I intend to kill a lot of people, Ilara. It's what I was raised to do, what I've spent my life perfecting. But you? He shook his head slowly. I walked into that cafe ready to do whatever was necessary. And then you asked me if I wanted room for cream. You had a smudge of chocolate on your apron, and you were humming some song I didn't recognize, and you looked at me like I was just a man ordering coffee. Not a monster. Not a killer. Just a man. That's not an answer. The answer is no. I never intended to kill you. From the moment I saw you, the only thing I intended was to figure out how to keep you alive. He crossed to where she stood, stopping just close enough that she could feel the heat of him without touching. The contract was a convenient excuse to be near you. To watch over you. To make sure no one else got close. You're obsessive. Yes. Controlling. Yes. Dangerous. More than you know. His hand came up, hovering near her face, not quite touching. Tell me to stop. Tell me you hate me. Tell me anything that will make it easier to let you walk out that door. And if I can't? Then we're both damned. His voice dropped to that low, velvety register that made her skin prickle. Because I told you, Alara, if you keep looking at me like I'm your savior while I'm covered in blood, I'm never letting you go. She should have run. Every rational part of her screamed to run. But rationality had never saved her mother's memory, never paid her bills, never protected her from the man stalking her streets. Cashin Thorne was irrational. He was chaos wrapped in a three-piece suit. He was the darkness her daylight world had always pretended didn't exist. But when she looked at him, really looked at him, she didn't see the monster he kept insisting he was. She saw a man who had paid her mother's bills without expecting thanks. A man who had sent her to a hotel with her favorite tea. A man who had spent 6 months watching over her not because he had to, but because he couldn't bear not to. Cashin, she said. Yes. I'm not looking away. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. The city glittered silently beyond the windows. The study held its breath. And Cashin Thorne stood frozen before her, as if her words had short-circuited something vital in his programming. Then he moved. Not toward her, away. He turned his back, walked to the window, and pressed both palms flat against the glass like he was trying to push through it. You should be running from me, he said to the night. You should be terrified. I am terrified. Alara didn't move from her spot, but her voice carried across the room. I'm terrified that my father was murdered and I never knew. I'm terrified that someone wants me dead for a debt I didn't create. I'm terrified of the man who's been following me, taking pictures, waiting for his chance to. She stopped, drew a breath. But when I think about facing all of that alone, I'm more terrified than anything. I'm not offering you safety, Alara. I'm offering you a different kind of danger. Maybe danger is all I have left. He turned then, and in the low light, his eyes were molten silver. You don't understand what you're saying. The moment you stay, you become part of my world. My enemies become your enemies. The blood on my hands stains everything I touch, everyone I touch. Then let me understand. She took a step toward him, then another, until she stood close enough to touch. Show me what I'm choosing. Not the polite customer. Not the protector. Show me who you really are. Something cracked in his expression. You may not like what you find. Maybe not. But I'm done making decisions based on what I like. I want to make decisions based on what's true. Cashin studied her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. Come with me. She took his hand. He led her through the penthouse, past doors she hadn't noticed, down a hallway she wouldn't have found on her own. At the end, a steel door with a keypad lock. He entered a code, and the door swung open to reveal a room that was clearly not meant for guests. It was an office, but not the kind executives kept. Maps covered one wall, printed with symbols and notations Alara couldn't decipher. Photographs were tacked to another, surveillance shots, she realized, of buildings and people. A bank of monitors showed feeds from cameras positioned around the city. And in the center of it all, a massive desk covered in documents, ledgers, and, she swallowed, what appeared to be dossiers on at least a dozen individuals. "This is my real work," Cashin said, dropping her hand. "This is what I do. I run an organization that spans 14 countries. We move money, weapons, information. We buy politicians and break corporations. We are the shadow behind the curtain, the hand that moves the pieces everyone thinks are moving on their own." Alara approached the wall of photographs, studying the faces. Some looked like businessmen. Others looked like soldiers. A few looked like people she might pass on the street without a second glance. "Are these targets?" "Some are. Some are allies. Some are enemies I haven't dealt with yet." He came to stand beside her. "Do you see the one in the top right corner? Gray hair, expensive watch." She nodded. "His name is Dmitry Marchenko. He's the man who ordered the hit on your father. And he's the man who hired Stellan to stalk you." Alara felt her blood turn to ice. "This is the man who killed my father?" "He gave the order. Others carried it out." Cashin's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "He's been trying to finish the job for 8 years. Your father's cooperation with the authorities cost him $30 million and 6 years in a minimum security prison. Men like Dmitry don't forget that kind of insult." "Then why haven't you killed him?" Cashin's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Politics. Dmitry has allies. Powerful ones. If I move against him openly, it starts a war I might not win. So I've been dismantling his operation piece by piece, cutting off his resources, turning his people against him. By the time I'm done, he'll have nothing left to protect him. But he hired someone to find me anyway. Because I miscalculated." For the first time, there was genuine regret in his voice. "I thought my protection would be enough. I thought if I kept you invisible, kept you off the board, Dmitry would focus on other problems. I didn't count on Stellan being good enough to find you." Alara turned to face him fully. "What now? What's the plan?" "Now I stop playing defense." Cashin moved to his desk, pulled a file from the stack. "Stellan is a professional, but he has weaknesses. He's arrogant. He likes to play with his prey. He's been sending those letters because he wants you to know he's there, he wants the fear, the control. Men like that always overplay their hand. You're going to draw him out." "Yes. Using me as bait." Cashin's expression flickered. "Using you as bait, with enough protection to ensure you never actually face him. He'll think he's getting close, and when he does, my people will be waiting. And if something goes wrong? Then I kill everyone in my way to get to you." He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, that Alara almost laughed. "Almost. That's your plan? Brute force?" "My plan is to make you safe, Alara. Whatever that takes." He closed the file, met her eyes. "I know you have questions. I know this is overwhelming. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She wanted to say no. Wanted to preserve some shred of independence, some sense that she was still in control of her own life. But the truth was, She'd lost control months ago, the moment the first letter arrived, the moment she realized someone wanted her dead for sins she hadn't committed. Cashin wasn't offering her control. He was offering her a fighting chance. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said. The plan was elaborate. Over the next 48 hours, Cashin walked her through every detail. She would return to her normal life, the cafe, her apartment, her visits to Vera at St. Rosaline's. But she would never truly be alone. Cashin's people would be everywhere, in the apartment across the hall, in the car parked at the corner, in the cafe disguised as customers. A tracker would be sewn into her jacket lining. A panic button would be built into a bracelet she'd wear at all times. "Stellan will notice the surveillance," Cashin explained. "He's too good not to. But he'll assume it's police protection, maybe private security. He won't expect the level of response I've planned. And when he makes his move? My team intercepts. We take him alive if possible, extract information about Dimitri's operation, and use it to bring the entire network down." "What if he doesn't want to be taken alive?" Cashin's smile was cold. "Then we improvise." Ilara spent those 48 hours in a strange limbo. She slept in a guest room at the penthouse, for your safety, Cashin insisted, though she suspected he simply didn't want to let her out of his sight. She ate meals prepared by a silent chef who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. She read books from the library and tried not to think about the blood that had paid for them. And she watched Cashin. He was different here, in his element. Gone was the careful politeness of the cafe customer. In its place was a man of relentless focus, issuing orders in rapid-fire sequences, switching between languages mid-sentence, managing an empire with the ease of someone born to power. His people treated him with a mixture of fear and devotion that Ilara found both impressive and unsettling. But there were moments, small ones, when the mask slipped. She caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression almost wistful. He asked, during a brief lull, whether she'd heard from the care facility about Vera. He made sure her favorite tea was always stocked in the kitchen. "Why?" she asked him on the second night, as they sat in the study drinking wine neither of them seemed to taste. "Why go to so much trouble for someone you were supposed to kill?" Cashin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Because you reminded me of something I thought I'd lost." "What's that?" "Hope." He set down his glass, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been doing this for 20 years, Ilara. I took over the organization when I was 19, after my father was killed by the same people who wanted your father dead. I thought I'd made peace with what I am, the violence, the manipulation, the moral compromises. I told myself it was necessary. That someone had to hold the darkness back, and it might as well be someone who understood it. But somewhere along the way, I stopped believing there was anything else. The darkness was all there was. And then," he shook his head. "And then I saw you laugh. This woman, working herself to exhaustion for a mother who doesn't remember her, leaving tips for strangers because she can't stand to see them struggle. You had every reason to be bitter, to be hard, but you weren't. You were kind. Genuinely kind, in a way I'd forgotten people could be." "I'm not that good," Ilara said quietly. "I get angry. I get scared. I've thought terrible things about the people who made my life this hard. Everyone thinks terrible things. The difference is what you do with them." He reached across the distance between them, took her hand in his. "You choose kindness anyway. That's why I couldn't kill you. That's why I can't let anyone else kill you. Because if someone like you can exist in this world, Maybe there's still something worth fighting for. Elara looked at their joined hands, his, scarred and rough, hers, chapped from dish soap and hard work. Such ordinary hands, considering the extraordinary circumstances. You're not what I expected, she admitted. Neither are you. His thumb traced patterns on her skin. I expected someone weak. Someone I could dismiss as collateral damage in a war I didn't start. Instead, I found someone stronger than half the men in my organization. I don't feel strong. The brave ones never do. He lifted her hand, pressed his lips to her knuckles in a gesture that felt almost courtly. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we begin. Tomorrow came faster than she was ready for. The return to normal life was jarring in its ordinariness. Elara went back to the cafe, made lattes, dealt with impatient customers, smiled until her face ached. She went home to her apartment, which now contained 3 different panic buttons and a security system that cost more than her car. She visited Vera at St. Rosaline's, held her mother's thin hand, and listened to stories about people who may or may not have existed. Through it all, she felt the weight of invisible eyes. Cashin's people were everywhere, but so was Stellan. She could feel him even when she couldn't see him. A shadow at the edge of her peripheral vision. A shiver down her spine when she walked home at night. The certainty that somewhere, in a car or a window or a crowd, someone was watching her become. A week passed. Then 2. Stellan made no move. He's testing your protection, Cashin told her during one of their nightly phone calls. Looking for weaknesses, gaps in coverage. He's patient. We need to be more patient. How long? As long as it takes. This ends when he makes a mistake. On the 17th day, he made one. Elara was closing the cafe alone. Josette had left early with a migraine, and the evening shift worker had called in sick. It was after 10, the streets nearly empty, rain turning the city into a blurred watercolor of light and shadow. She was locking the front door when she felt it, that familiar shiver, sharper than usual. She didn't turn around. Her hand found the bracelet on her wrist, pressed the hidden button, and kept moving. Footsteps behind her. Unhurried. Deliberate. Elara Vance. The voice was smooth, accented, almost pleasant. Finally, we meet. She turned. Stellan Voronov was taller than he'd looked from across the street, broader in the shoulders. His face was angular, handsome in a cruel way, with pale eyes that caught the streetlight and reflected nothing. He was dressed all in black, and his hands, she noticed, were gloved. You've been watching me, she said, keeping her voice steady. Observing. Appreciating. He tilted his head, studied her like a collector examining a rare specimen. You're not what I expected. Mr. Thorne's usual tastes run to socialites and heiresses. You're so common. Maybe he was tired of heiresses. Stellan laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Maybe. Or maybe he's playing a longer game than I realized. He took a step closer, and Elara held her ground. Either way, you've served your purpose. Cashin Thorne cares about you. That makes you valuable. That makes you leverage. I'm not going anywhere with you. Oh, but you are. Another step. You pressed your little panic button, didn't you? Very good. His people will be here in approximately 4 minutes. But I only need one. He moved fast, faster than she'd expected. She tried to run, but he caught her arm, spun her around, and pressed something sharp against her throat. A needle, she realized. Glinting in the streetlight. Sedative, he murmured in her ear. You'll wake up somewhere comfortable. We'll have a conversation. And then we'll see what Mr. Thorne is willing to sacrifice to get you back. Ilara's mind raced. 4 minutes. She needed to stall for 4 minutes. You're making a mistake, she said. Cashin will destroy you. Cashin has been trying to destroy me for years. He keeps failing. Stellan's grip tightened. Men like him think they're untouchable. They build their empires on blood and secrets and assume no one can touch them. But everyone has a weakness. His just happens to be you. Then why wait? Why the letters, the photographs, the games? Because I wanted him to know I was coming. Stellan's voice dropped to a purr. I wanted him to spend every night imagining what I might do to you. Fear is a weapon, Ilara. Used correctly, it's more effective than any gun. 2 minutes. Maybe 3. You don't know him, Ilara said. You think you do, but you don't. Cashin isn't afraid. He's right here. The voice came from the shadows, and Stellan's head snapped up. But he wasn't fast enough. The gunshot came from nowhere, a sharp crack that split the night. Stellan's hand, the one holding the needle, exploded in a spray of blood and bone. He screamed, releasing Ilara, staggering backward. Cashin emerged from the darkness like a specter of vengeance, his matte black beretta still raised, his face carved from granite. Behind him, his people materialized from doorways and alley mouths, surrounding Stellan in a net of trained killers. You didn't think I'd just wait, did you? Cashin said, his voice terrifyingly calm. I've been watching you for 2 weeks, Stellan. Tracking your patterns. Learning your tells. You think you're clever? You're predictable. Stellan clutched his ruined hand, his face twisted in agony and rage. You'll never get to Dmitri. He'll burn you to the ground. Dmitri is already burning. Cashin stepped closer, the gun now aimed at Stellan's chest. 3 hours ago, my people moved on 6 of his facilities simultaneously. By morning, he'll have nothing left, no money, no soldiers, no allies willing to risk my wrath. You're bluffing. I never bluff. Cashin's eyes never left Stellan's face. You should have stayed in Moscow, Stellan. You should have taken any other job in the world. But you came for her, his voice dropped to something barely human, and that means you die. Wait. Ilara stepped forward, her hand on Cashin's arm. Wait. I need to know something. Cashin's jaw tightened, but he didn't fire. Ilara approached Stellan, ignoring the blood pooling at his feet. The letters. The messages you left. I'm watching you become. Become what? Stellan's pale eyes met hers, and for a moment, the pain seemed to fade, replaced by something almost like respect. What you're becoming now. Strong. Dangerous. A woman who can stand next to a monster and not flinch. He smiled, blood staining his teeth. Dmitri didn't just want you dead. He wanted you broken first. Wanted Cashin to watch you crumble, to see his weakness exposed for the world. But you didn't break. You became something else. What? His equal. Stellan laughed, then coughed, blood spattering his lips. He doesn't know it yet, but you're the end of him. Not his destruction, his transformation. You'll make him into something more than a monster. And that's the most dangerous thing of all. Cashin's arm rose. No. Ilara's hand was still on his sleeve. Don't. He would have killed you. But he didn't. And killing him won't change what he's done. She met Cashin's eyes, saw the conflict raging there. Let your people take him. Get the information you need. But don't do this in front of me. Not like this. For a terrible moment, she thought he wouldn't listen. The predator in him was too close to the surface, too hungry for blood. Then something shifted. His arm lowered. He nodded to his people, and they closed in on Stellan, dragging him away into the night. When they were gone, Cashin turned to her. His composure was cracking now, the adrenaline giving way to something rawer. He could have killed you. If I'd been 1 minute later. But you weren't. She reached up, touched his face, the first time she'd initiated contact between them. You came. I'll always come. His voice was rough, broken. I told you, Alara. I can't let you go. She should have been afraid. Should have recoiled from this blood-soaked man with murder in his eyes. But when she looked at him, really looked at him, she didn't see a monster. She saw her future. Then don't, she said. And for the first time since she'd met him, Cashin Thorne smiled. Not the polite smile of the cafe customer, not the cold smile of the Mafia Don. Something real. Something human. Something that belonged only to her. The aftermath of that night unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Stellan Voronov was interrogated by Cashin's people, Alara didn't ask about the methods, and Cashin didn't offer details. What she did know was that the information extracted led to Dmitry Marchenko's complete downfall. His remaining assets were seized, his allies abandoned him, and his organization collapsed like a house of cards. 3 weeks after the confrontation outside the cafe, Dmitry was found in a warehouse on the edge of the city, alone and broken, surrounded by evidence of every crime he'd ever committed. The police were called anonymously. The trial would be long, but the outcome was never in doubt. He'll die in prison, Cashin told her one evening, as they stood on the balcony of his penthouse, watching the sun set over the city. It's not as satisfying as doing it myself, but you asked me to try. To be something better than what I've been. And how does it feel? He considered the question. Strange. Unfamiliar. A pause. Not unpleasant. Alara leaned against him, felt his arm come around her shoulders. In the weeks since Stellan's capture, something had shifted between them. The pretense was gone, no more kind customer and innocent barista, no more protector and protected. They were simply two people, learning each other in the aftermath of chaos. He had shown her more of his world. Not the violence, he kept that as far from her as possible, but the infrastructure. The legitimate businesses that funded his organization. The charitable foundations that laundered his guilt into good works. The people who depended on him, not out of fear, but out of genuine loyalty. It's not what I imagined, she admitted one night, after meeting Cashin's inner circle, a group of surprisingly ordinary people who treated their boss with a mixture of exasperation and devotion. What did you imagine? I don't know. More evil henchmen? Secret lairs? Cashin laughed, a real laugh, one that crinkled the corners of his eyes and softened the hard lines of his face. Sorry to disappoint. Most days are boring. Paperwork. Phone calls. Negotiations with people who would rather kill me than deal with me. But you chose this life. I was born into it. Choosing came later. He pulled her closer, pressed a kiss to her temple. And now, I'm choosing something else. She didn't ask what he meant. She was learning to be patient with his revelations. The answer came 3 months later. Ilara was at St. Rosaline's, sitting with Vera in the sun-drenched common room. Her mother had been having a good day. She'd remembered Ilara's name, asked about the cafe, even made a joke about the terrible coffee they served at the facility. Moments like this were rare now, and Ilara treasured them like rare gems. "There's a young man who keeps calling about you," Vera said suddenly, her eyes surprisingly sharp. "Very polite. Expensive voice." "Expensive voice?" "You know. The kind that sounds like money." Vera smiled, a ghost of her former mischief dancing in her expression. "He asked my permission for something. Very old-fashioned." Ilara's heart skipped. "What did he ask?" "I don't remember exactly. Something about making you happy." Vera patted her hand. "I told him yes, of course. You deserve to be happy, darling. You've been sad for too long." That evening, when Ilara returned to the penthouse, she'd been living there for 2 months now, her cramped apartment sublet to a grateful nursing student, she found Cashin waiting in the study. He was nervous. She could tell by the way he was standing, the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching at his sides. In the 6 months she'd known him, first as the kind customer, now as something infinitely more, she had never seen Cashin Thorne nervous. "You talked to my mother," she said. "I did." "She said you asked permission for something." "I did." Ilara crossed the room, stopped in front of him. "Are you going to tell me what?" Cashin took a breath. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "I've been thinking about what Stellan said. About you being my transformation. About you making me into something more than a monster." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. "I've spent my life taking things, power, money, lives. I don't know how to give. I don't know how to be soft, or patient, or kind. But you make me want to learn." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not ostentatious, not the kind of rock a Mafia Don might be expected to offer. Just a simple gold band with a deep blue sapphire, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light like stars. "It was my mother's," he said. "She died when I was 12. This is the only thing of hers I kept." Ilara's eyes filled with tears. "Cashin, I'm not asking you to be a mafia wife. I'm not asking you to accept the violence or the blood or the darkness of what I do." He took her hand, pressed the box into her palm. "I'm asking you to stay. To be my compass when I lose my way. To remind me, every day, that there's something worth being better for." "Is this a proposal?" "It's a promise." His forehead came to rest against hers. "I told you once that if you kept looking at me like I was your savior, I'd never let you go. But I don't want to trap you, Ilara. I want you to choose. I want you to stay because you want to, not because I've pulled you into my world with no escape. And if I choose to stay? Then I spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." His voice cracked, just slightly. "I know I'm not a good man. But for you, I want to be a better one." Ilara looked at the ring in her hand, this small, precious thing that represented everything she never knew she wanted. She thought about her mother's smile that afternoon, about the peace she'd found in the most unexpected place, about the man standing before her with his heart laid bare. She thought about the first time she'd seen him, walking into the cafe like a thunderstorm in human form. The first time he'd asked about her mother. The first time he'd touched her, his hand on her shoulder, promising she wasn't alone. She thought about the blood on his hands and the kindness in his eyes. The violence he was capable of and the gentleness he showed only to her. The monster he called himself and the man she saw beneath the surface. "I'm not looking away," she said, echoing the words that had sealed their fate that night in the penthouse. "I haven't looked away since the moment I saw you." She slipped the ring onto her finger. Cashin's arms came around her, pulling her close, and when he kissed her, it wasn't with the desperate hunger of a man afraid she might run. It was with the slow, deep certainty of a man who finally understood what he'd been fighting for. "You were right about Stellan's prediction," she murmured against his lips. "Which one?" "That I'd be the end of you." She pulled back, looked into those storm-gray eyes that had once terrified her and now felt like home. "But not your destruction. Your transformation." "Into what?" "Into someone who deserves a happy ending." Cashin's smile was soft, almost wondering. "And you think I can have that? After everything?" "I think we both can." Ilara touched his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "We've both been surviving for so long. Maybe it's time to start living instead." A year later, they were married in a small ceremony on the grounds of St. Rosaline's, so Vera could attend. The bride wore a simple ivory dress. The groom wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit without a single bloodstain. The guests were an unlikely combination of cafe workers and reformed criminals, united by the impossible love story playing out before them. Vera, in a rare moment of perfect clarity, took Ilara's hand before the ceremony and said, "Your father would have liked him. He's got that same fire in his eyes, the kind that burns for something bigger than himself." "I thought you didn't remember, Dad." "I remember the important things." Vera squeezed her hand. "And I remember that you deserve the world, sweetheart. It looks like you finally found someone willing to give it to you." As Ilara walked toward Cashin, as she saw his expression shift from nervousness to wonder to pure, unguarded joy, she realized that Stellan had been right about one more thing. She hadn't broken. She had become. Not a victim. Not a pawn. Not collateral damage in someone else's war. She had become a woman who stared into the darkness and chose to stay. A woman who loved a monster and found the man hidden inside. A woman who transformed her suffering into strength and her fear into something that looked remarkably like courage. And when Cashin said "I do," when he kissed her in front of everyone they loved, when he whispered against her lips that he would spend the rest of his life learning how to deserve her, she knew she had found something more valuable than safety. She had found truth. She had found home. She had found the man who had looked at her not as a weakness, not as leverage, not as a pawn in someone else's war, but as a choice. The city lights blurred beyond the balcony, but Ilara barely noticed them. Cashin's arms were around her from behind, solid and warm, his chin resting lightly against her hair. This was the same man who once ruled rooms with silence alone, who could end lives with a nod, yet here he stood, breathing her in like he was afraid she might disappear if he didn't. "You know," Cashin said quietly, "I used to believe peace was a myth people invented to sleep at night." Ilara leaned back into him. "And now?" "Now I think it's rarer than power. And far more dangerous." A pause. "Because it gives you something to lose." She turned in his arms, meeting his gaze. Storm-gray eyes. Still sharp. Still dangerous. But no longer empty. "I'm not afraid of what you are," she said. "I'm afraid of what the world will try to make you again." Cashin's thumb brushed her cheek, reverent. "Then stay. Remind me." And she did. Not by forgiving everything. Not by pretending blood hadn't been spilled. but by refusing to let violence be the only language spoken in the spaces she occupied. Cashin didn't become gentle overnight. Redemption was not a switch, it was a discipline. Some days he failed. Some nights the ghosts won. But every morning, he chose again. Weeks turned into months. The penthouse filled with traces of a real life, books left open, mugs abandoned mid-sip, laughter echoing down hallways once meant only for strategy and secrecy. Ilara kept her job longer than anyone expected. Cashin never asked her to quit. He simply made sure she always came home. Stelin Voronov never spoke again. Dmitry Marchenko never left prison. The past, for once, stayed where it belonged. One quiet afternoon at St. Rosaline's, Vera held Cashin's hand and studied him with startling clarity. "You're different," she said. Cashin stiffened. "Different, good or bad?" Vera smiled. "Different alive." Ilara watched something unguarded pass across Cashin's face, a grief he'd never named, a hope he barely trusted. He squeezed Vera's hand gently, as if she were something precious and fragile, not because she was weak, but because she mattered. That night, Cashin asked Ilara a question he'd never asked anyone before. "Do you ever regret not running?" She answered without hesitation. "No. Because running would have kept me safe. Staying taught me who I am." He kissed her then, not urgently, not desperately, but with certainty. A year later, the city whispered about the Mafia Don who had changed. Who killed less? Who protected more? Who ruled with restraint instead of terror? They didn't know her name. But she knew his. And when Cashin Thorne looked at Ilara, across crowded rooms, across candlelit dinners, across quiet mornings heavy with peace, he no longer warned her to look away. He only held her closer. Because in a world built on fear, they had done the most dangerous thing of all. They had chosen love. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Drop a comment, what would you have done in her place? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe and share it with someone who understands that sometimes, the darkest love stories shine the brightest. Because she didn't just survive. She became.